What's up, everybody? Every quarter, JP Morgan, the largest bank in the US, puts out their guide to the markets. It's a pretty nice presentation. They have 60 to 70 slides here going over all sorts of things: equity valuations, bonds, the economy, stats about various segments of the stock market, international markets, all sorts of things. We went through this together last quarter, and now we're into October, so let's go through the JP Morgan Guide to Markets fourth quarter presentation. As always, if you get value out of the video, subscribe to the channel. If you want, consider supporting me on Patreon. Now, let's get into it. We start out with some rough overviews of just the valuation of the S&P 500, and the takeaway here is the S&P 500 is expensive. And I should add, estimates of forward earnings are often optimistic, so if anything, this number is low. We haven't seen numbers this high since the dot-com bubble. Doesn't mean there's going to be a crash, but markets are expensive. Now, if you follow the channel, I made two videos not too long ago, I think within the past month, arguing each side of the question, are we in a bubble? In the first video, I made the case that the S&P 500 as a whole is in a bubble, or at least extremely overvalued right now. And in the second video, I made the opposite case that no, valuations aren't cheap, but they're reasonable considering the forward expectations. Now, my personal opinion is more on the former, that the S&P 500 is just extremely expensive right now. And it's not even because of these massive mega caps, these tech stocks, Magnificent Seven, things like Nvidia, Microsoft, Amazon. These companies aren't cheap, and the market cap of the top 10 companies in the S&P 500 we see right now is about 40%. But look at the earnings. The earnings of these 10 companies make up about 32% of the earnings of the total S&P 500. For how dominant these businesses are, and given that many of them are really cash flow machines, I mean, we see the earnings growth of the Magnificent Seven has been incredible over the past 5 years. I think you can make the case that many of these companies, their valuation is reasonable. It's understandable. But if you just look at the median stock in the S&P 500, that 50th percentile stock, right now it's trading at a PE of roughly 20. This is close to all-time highs, and most of these median companies in the S&P 500, they're average businesses. They don't have crazy growth expectations, and this is personally where I start finding some companies that look a little bubbly to me. I know I presented an example in a previous video of Procter & Gamble, but really Procter & Gamble is similar to so many other companies in the S&P 500. It's trading at a price to earnings of, I think 24-ish, somewhere around there. It has effectively no growth, and yes, while it's a decent quality company, it's stable, it really does not make sense to me why a company like this should trade with a multiple above 20. I mean, the price of this stock and many others like it could probably be cut in half, and it wouldn't look exceedingly undervalued yet. And this brings us to some expectations for forward returns. JP Morgan isn't saying, this is what the 5-year annualized return of the S&P 500 is going to be. Obviously, no one can predict that, but based on current valuations and looking at where returns have been in the past, you see that, when you have a higher forward price to earnings multiple, the expectations for 5-year annualized returns are lower. Right now, using history as a guide, essentially they're saying, with a forward PE of 23, we're expecting basically 0% total returns for 5 years. Obviously, the actual result could outperform or underperform this, but if there are 0% total returns for 5 years, then when accounting for inflation, you would be down on your money if you invest in the S&P 500 today, even after holding for 5 years. In fact, if you see all these data points that are in the negative under the zero line here, you see that just holding for 5 years is no guarantee that you are going to have positive returns. Many people think of 5 years as a long time in the stock market, but really, it's not that long. So while it's true that stocks in the long run tend to go up, sometimes 5 years just not long enough. They have a nice breakdown here of valuation by sectors. So we can see here the forward PE ratio for, energy, financials, tech relative to their 20-year average. And what we see is that basically across every sector, stocks look expensive. There's currently no sector that's cheaper than its 20-year average, but some sectors are a little closer than others. We see energy, real estate, healthcare. These sectors as a whole are not that much ahead of their 20-year average. So maybe looking a little expensive as a whole, but not too out of line. Where you see the biggest disconnect, you see this in consumer discretionary, tech, industrials to some extent. These sectors are quite expensive relative to where they have been. And looking across size of companies, whether you're looking at small caps, mid caps, or the large caps, normally when we're looking at the S&P 500, we're looking at large cap companies. What we see is that no matter how you slice it, basically everything is looking expensive relative to its 20-year average. The difference in current valuations to historical valuations is smaller in small caps and also mid cap value. But even these sectors don't look particularly cheap. They're just less expensive than, the large cap growth, large cap blend, stuff like that. And one thing to keep in mind with small caps is there are a lot of unprofitable small cap companies right now. We see here 46% of small caps unprofitable. For me, I am finding opportunities in small caps. I present a lot of them here on the channel, but I wouldn't want to invest in a small cap index. I would want to pick my winners. Now, moving on, the next big section they have here is on the economy, and they start out with some stats on GDP. We see GDP growth has been trending, up 2-ish% a year over time. We are an economy that is driven primarily by consumption. That is more than 2/3 of GDP, but a not insignificant portion is coming from government spending. You see state and local government and federal government spending. This accounts for quite a bit, over 17% of GDP. We are very good at spending more than we bring in. We see here the deficit is growing. More than a quarter of spending is deficit. It's not funded by the money that the government is bringing in. And the percentage of spending that's going to interest on our debt, it has been going up. I'm not an economist. Will there be a reckoning here at some point? I'm not sure. I wouldn't be surprised if within the next generation we see some negative effects on this on GDP or possibly on the dollar. But for now, the train keeps moving along. As far as the dollar, looking at the dollar, we have been in an uptrend here since the great financial crisis. But recently, past few years, the dollar is down. Down pretty significantly, actually, year to date. Year to date, down 10%. This has been a significant tailwind if you are investing in international stocks. Emerging markets get a big boost as the dollar weakens. Again, not an economist. I don't try to predict the future movements of, big macro things like the dollar here, but we will take a look at international stocks in a moment. Interestingly, they now have some slides on artificial intelligence in their presentation. We see here on the left the AI spending from the big hyperscalers, Google, Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, and Oracle here. And previously, most of these companies were considered, asset light, maybe, not Amazon. Amazon has a ton of warehouses, but their AWS segment, asset light, cash flow machines, low capex, just producing an absolutely massive amount of operating cash flow. But now we see a larger and larger percentage of that operating cash flow is going towards AI. While earnings from AI segments could be a huge tailwind for these companies going forward, there's also a risk here. Free cash flow for these companies in general is going down. We saw that when we looked at Google's earnings, free cash flow is down because of their investment in AI. And while many AI applications are likely to change the world, if some things become more commoditized, like, for example, ChatGPT, yes, it's incredible, but if someone can make DeepSeek for a fraction of the price by basically just piggybacking off your work, then it's possible the earnings, the actual future cash flow from these investments is going to be lower than some analysts think. I found this graph in their presentation to be interesting. Not sure how actionable it is, but we see here on the left, this is the US labor productivity growth rate, and it's a trailing 10-year average. There's more than 100 years on this chart. We see electrification really boosted productivity. There's natural cycles post-World War II, productivity growth very high. Then falling down, personal computer comes out. That does seem to ignite productivity growth along with the internet. Interestingly, productivity growth seems relatively low from, 2010 to 2020. As far as what's going to happen in the future with AI, who knows? But the market is certainly anticipating a decent surge in productivity from AI. I also want to point out before we move on from this economy section that look at delinquencies down here. Delinquencies on pretty much every kind of debt have been going up over the past 5 years. Obviously, student loans have spiked, but that's simply because you didn't have to pay your student loans for 4 years. But now that payments have resumed, student loan delinquencies are pretty much at the highest rate that they have ever been recorded. Auto loan debt, credit card debt, delinquency rates are pretty close to the highest levels that we've seen since the great financial crisis. Now, we're not approaching 2008 levels of delinquency yet, especially not for mortgages, but this is definitely something to keep an eye on. The next section here is all on fixed income, the Fed, interest rates, the yield curve, stuff like that. We're not going to look at every slide in here. Just know that while interest rates have picked up in the past few years, the real yields are still quite low. Real yield is just the nominal yield, and here we're looking at 10-year treasury yields minus inflation. Real yields, this gray line, still quite low. So what that means is interest rates really aren't that high. And still, everyone in the Fed is predicting that interest rates are going to come down closer to, 3% maybe in a long run average. But again, considering how low real yields are, there's a limit to how much you can lower interest rates without being too stimulative, too inflationary. I'll link this whole presentation down below if you want to take a look at any of the slides that I'm kind of just passing over here. Here is one I do want to point out. We're looking at corporate credit spreads. So basically, if you want to buy debt, you could just buy treasuries, buy government debt, or, maybe you decide I'll buy corporate debt. I'll buy a bond from, UNH or maybe Apple if you want to buy some very high quality investment grade corporate bonds. Or maybe you decide you really want more yield. You're okay buying a bond from a lower quality company, maybe a company that's under a little more stress. And if you buy up that debt, you expect to be compensated more. The difference in yield between the amount that you can make buying this corporate debt versus buying government debt, that is the spread. When people are very concerned about bankruptcy risk, that spread is going to be quite high. Well, right now, what we're seeing is that spreads are historically low. These are extremely low levels. You're not getting paid much to take on the additional risk of buying up corporate debt. Whether we're talking about the investment grade spread or the high yield spread, you are looking at pretty much the lowest spreads in history. So in case you're wondering if I'm interested in buying bonds, if I'm interested in buying fixed income, the answer is a definite no. If I had cash and I didn't want to invest it in stocks, I didn't want to invest it in the market, I would be keeping it in US Treasuries, and that's it. Now, moving on, the next section is all on global equities, international stocks, how they relate to US stocks. We see here the US stock market now about 2/3 of the global market cap. US markets really have had an incredible run here. We basically see since the great financial crisis, US markets outperformed. Many investors can't even recall a time in which US markets have not outperformed, but it isn't always the case that the US market is better. We see here, there's a 6-year period from, 2002 to 2008, international markets outperformed. Here we have a period in the 80s, international markets vastly outperformed. A lot of this was because of Japan. That was arguably a bubble, but still you see a natural cycle. International markets outperforming, US markets outperforming, and in general, these gray bits here, that's periods of weakening dollar, the dollar declining. And when the dollar is declining, international often tends to do better than the US. We have had an unusually long period here of a strong dollar and strong US markets. I don't know if this is going to revert anytime soon, but what I do know is the US market is pretty expensive relative to international stocks. Emerging markets, China, Europe, they are currently a bit more expensive than their long run average, but not like so much. They're a bit high, but the US is quite high relative to its historical average. The discount you get for buying the rest of the world's stocks is way larger than usual. And this is at a time when consensus earnings growth for much of the rest of the world, India, Japan, Europe, is relatively in line with where projected earnings growth is for the US. Over the past 15 years, over this incredible run in US stocks, we see that a lot of the returns have come from, yes, earnings growth, but also multiple expansion, just people wanting to put more money into US stocks. Going forward, especially if the dollar continues to weaken and this purple currency effect here moves from being a headwind, being a negative, to being a positive for international stocks, then I have no clue who's going to be the winner over the next decade, the US or Japan, Europe. I don't know. As far as what I'm doing, the actions that I'm actually taking with my money, I'm looking for individual stocks that I consider to be deeply undervalued. If I find them in the US, great. If they're in Europe or if they're in emerging markets, that's okay too. I don't want to have too much exposure to any one geography that I consider to be particularly risky, but I am not buying the broad index right now. I think stocks are expensive. They might not be .com level expensive, but they're pretty close. And in the .com era, if you were buying deep value stocks, you did all right. Even as the market crashed, you did okay. And that's also why I remain close to fully invested. I don't have a ton of money sitting in cash. I feel like I continue to find opportunities, I share them on this channel, and I think if we focus on excellent risk reward in our investments, I think we're going to do okay. So with that said, if you got value out of the video, subscribe to the channel. If you want to see any more of this presentation, there were tons of slides we didn't go over. I'm going to put a link to that down below. Some of them are pretty interesting. Like for example, this one here, you see, if you invest in the market at all-time highs, you did just fine historically. And if you agree or disagree with anything I said in this video, leave that down in the comments below. If you want, consider supporting me on Patreon. And as always, I hope to see you all in another video.